haunted whispers. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in a small town, I was more inclined to dismiss the tales of haunted houses as mere folklore, stories spun by bored locals. But everything changed when I inherited my grandmother's old Victorian home on the outskirts of town. The house, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden, had always been a source of intrigue and fear among the neighborhood kids. They whispered about the strange noises that echoed through its halls and the flickering lights that danced in the windows at night. As I stood before the creaking front door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door groaning in protest as it swung open. The musty scent of aged wood and dust enveloped me, and I felt as if I had stepped back in time. The first few days were uneventful. I busied myself with cleaning and unpacking, trying to breathe new life into the old place. But on the fourth night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a soft whisper. It was faint, almost like a breeze brushing against my ear. I sat up, heart racing, and strained to listen. "Help me," it seemed to say. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of the house. I discovered that my grandmother had lived there alone for decades after my grandfather's mysterious disappearance. The townsfolk had their theories. Some claimed he had run off with another woman, while others whispered of darker fates. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I realized that the house held secrets I was only beginning to uncover. The following night, I decided to explore the attic, a place I had avoided until now. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking ominously beneath my weight. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten memories. As I rummaged through the boxes, I stumbled upon a faded photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day. They looked so happy, but there was something unsettling about the way my grandmother's eyes seemed to gaze past the camera, as if she were looking at something or someone else. Suddenly I heard it again, the whisper. This time it was louder, more insistent. "Help me." My heart raced as I turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. In that moment of fear, I felt a presence beside me. I turned, and there, in the dim light, stood a figure woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me," she repeated, her voice echoing in the stillness. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Was this my grandmother, or someone else entirely? Gathering my courage, I asked, "What do you need?" The figure pointed toward a corner of the attic, where an old trunk lay half hidden beneath a tattered blanket. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened the trunk, I found a collection of letters, yellowed with age. They were love letters, filled with longing and despair, written by my grandfather to a woman I had never heard of. The realization hit me like a wave. My grandmother had been haunted not just by the house, but by the betrayal of a love lost. The whispers were her cries for help, a plea for closure. I felt a surge of empathy for the woman who had once lived in this house, who had loved and lost so deeply. With newfound determination, I began to read the letters aloud, hoping to bring peace to the restless spirit. As I spoke the words of love and sorrow, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew lighter, and the oppressive weight that had settled in the attic began to lift. The figure smiled faintly, and for a moment, I felt a warmth envelop me, as if the house itself was thanking me. When I finished reading, the door creaked open and the figure began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now a gentle breeze. I watched as she disappeared, leaving behind a sense of calm that filled the attic. From that night on, the house felt different. The whispers ceased, and the shadows that once loomed over me transformed into a comforting embrace. I realized that the haunted house was not just a place of fear, but a sanctuary of memories, love, and healing. I had come to understand that sometimes the past needs to be acknowledged before it can be laid to rest. As I settled into my new home, I felt a connection to my grandmother and the life she had lived. The house, once a source of dread, had become a place of solace, a reminder that love, even when lost, can transcend time and space. Bridge. Growing up in the small town of Blackwood, I often heard whispers about the infamous Blackwood Bridge. It was said to be haunted by the spirit of a young woman who had met a tragic fate there. The locals spoke of her ghost appearing on foggy nights, beckoning to those who dared to cross the bridge after dark. As a teenager, I dismissed these tales as mere superstition, but curiosity always lingered in the back of my mind. One chilly autumn evening, my friends and I decided to test our courage. We gathered at the edge of the bridge, armed with flashlights and bravado. The air was thick with anticipation, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As we approached the bridge, I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off as excitement. "Are you guys ready?" I asked, trying to sound confident. My friends nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. We stepped onto the wooden planks, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness. The bridge creaked beneath us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we reached the center of the bridge, the fog began to roll in, enveloping us in a thick blanket of grey. It was then that I heard Ita's soft, mournful cry that seemed to drift through the mist. My heart raced as I exchanged nervous glances with my friends. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Suddenly a figure emerged from the fog. A woman in a flowing white dress stood at the edge of the bridge, her long hair cascading down her back. My breath caught in my throat as I realized we were witnessing the legend come to life. The stories had been true. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the night. I felt an overwhelming urge to approach her, but fear rooted me to the spot. My friends, however, were frozen in place, their faces pale with terror. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. The woman pointed toward the river below, her expression a mix of sorrow and desperation. I followed her gaze and saw something glimmering in the water, a locket perhaps, or a piece of jewelry. Without thinking, I took a step forward, compelled by an inexplicable force. "I'll help you," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned over the edge of the bridge, the fog thickened, and the woman's figure began to fade. "Wait!" I called out, but she was gone, leaving only the sound of the rushing water below. Determined to uncover the truth, I climbed down the rocky bank, my friends hesitating at the top. The water was cold and dark, but I could see the faint glimmer of the object beneath the surface. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something smooth and metallic. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled it out, silver locket, tarnished but still beautiful. As I held it in my hands, I felt a rush of emotions. wash over me. The locket was engraved with the initials EM and a small photograph of a smiling couple inside. I realized then that this was the key to the woman's story, a piece of her past that had been lost to time. I climbed back up to the bridge, my heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. My friends were waiting, their eyes wide with disbelief. "What happened?" one of them asked, glancing nervously at the spot where the woman had stood. "I think I found something," I said, holding up the locket. "This belonged to her." As I spoke, a gentle breeze swept through the air, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as if the spirit of the woman was finally at peace. That night, we returned to town, the locket safely tucked away in my pocket. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had connected with something beyond this world. The legend of Blackwood Bridge was no longer just a story. It was a reminder of the love and loss that lingered in the shadows. In the days that followed, I researched the history of the bridge and discovered that the woman was named Emily, a local girl who had drowned in the river many years ago. Her tragic story had been forgotten, but I vowed to honor her memory. I returned to the bridge, locket in hand, and placed it at the base of the old wooden structure, a tribute to the spirit that had touched my life. From that day on, I no longer feared the bridge. Instead, I saw it as a place of connection, a reminder that even in death, love endures. The whispers of the past had become a part of my own story, and I knew that Emily would never be forgotten. When I moved into the quaint little neighborhood of Maplewood, I was filled with excitement. The tree-lined streets, friendly faces, and charming houses made it seem like the perfect place to start anew. However, there was one house that stood out among the rest, a dilapidated old Victorian at the end of the street. It was shrouded in mystery, and the rumors about its occupant sent shivers down my spine. The neighbors whispered about Mr. Thompson, the reclusive man who lived there. They said he rarely left his home and that strange noises could be heard coming from within. Some claimed to have seen him peering out from behind the curtains, his eyes glinting like a predator watching its prey. I tried to dismiss these tales as mere gossip, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, as I was returning home from work, I noticed the front door of Mr. Thompson's house slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hesitated before approaching. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I peered inside, but the dim light made it difficult to see anything clearly. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response. I took a step closer, and the door creaked ominously as it swung open wider. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside, the musty scent of decay filling my nostrils. The interior was a time capsule of neglect. Dust-covered furniture loomed in the shadows, and cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. As I explored the dimly lit rooms, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching my every move. Suddenly I heard a noise, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the back of the house. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I was drawn deeper into the darkness. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached a door at the end of a narrow hallway. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was filled with strange objects, old photographs, jars filled with odd specimens, and what appeared to be a collection of taxidermied animals. My stomach churned at the sight, and I realized that Mr. Thompson was not just a reclusive neighbor. He was a collector of the macabre. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. There, in the shadows, stood Mr. Thompson himself. His gaunt figure was draped in a tattered robe, and his eyes bore into me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "What are you doing in my house?" he rasped, his voice low and gravelly. I stammered, trying to find the words to explain myself, but fear had rendered me speechless. "It was just curious," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression softened for a moment, but then a sinister smile crept across his face. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said, stepping closer. "You never know what you might find." I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. "I'm sorry, I should go," I said, turning to flee. But as I reached the door, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Not so fast," he said, his grip tightening. "You've seen too much." Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I wrenched my arm away and bolted for the door. I could hear him calling after me, his voice echoing in the empty house, but I didn't stop until I was safely back on the street. Breathless and shaken, I glanced back at the house. Mr. Thompson stood in the doorway, watching me with those piercing eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I had crossed a line I shouldn't have. In the days that followed, I avoided the old Victorian at all costs. The whispers of the neighbors took on a new meaning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Thompson was always watching. I began to notice strange occurrences, items missing from my porch, shadows flitting past my windows at night, and the unsettling sensation of being followed. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to confront my fears. I gathered my courage and approached the old house once more. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the neighborhood. As I reached the front door, I hesitated, but the need for answers pushed me forward. I knocked, my heart racing. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mr. Thompson's gaunt figure once more. "Back for more, are we?" he asked, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "I need to know what you're doing in there," I said, my voice trembling. "What are you hiding?" He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Come and see for yourself," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Reluctantly, I stepped inside, the familiar musty scent enveloping me once more. He led me to the back room, and as I entered, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. The walls were lined with photographs of the neighborhood, each one marked with a date and a name. My name was among them, along with the names of my friends and neighbors. "What is this?" I gasped, my heart racing. "Why do you have these?" Mr. Thompson chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with madness. "I like to keep track of my neighbors. You never know when someone might become interesting." I stumbled back, realizing the true horror of my situation. He was not just a creepy neighbor, he was a predator, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I turned to flee, but he blocked my path, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're part of my collection now." With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed past him and raced for the door. I could hear him laughing behind me, the sound echoing in the darkness. I burst out of the house and ran down the street, not stopping, until I reached the safety of my own home. From that night on, I kept my distance from Mr. Thompson and the old Victorian. The neighborhood that once felt like a safe haven had become a place of fear and paranoia. I knew that I would never look at my neighbors the same way again, and the watchful eyes of Mr. Thompson would haunt me for years to come. As a thrill-seeker and urban explorer, I had always been drawn to abandoned places. There was something exhilarating about stepping into a world frozen in time, where nature slowly reclaimed what humanity had left behind. So, when I heard about the old asylum on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to see it for myself. The drive to the asylum was filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown path that led to the entrance. The building loomed ahead, its crumbling facade and shattered windows giving it an air of foreboding. I parked my car and took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I stepped through the rusted gates, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I made my way toward the entrance. The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. I ventured deeper into the asylum, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room I entered told a story of neglect, tattered curtains swaying in the breeze, overturned chairs, and remnants of lives once lived. I felt a strange mix of sadness and curiosity as I explored the remnants of the past. As I wandered through the halls, I stumbled upon a room that seemed different from the others. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered inside. I pushed it open and was met with a sight that took my breath away. The room was filled with old medical equipment, dusty books, and a large window that overlooked the overgrown garden outside, but it was the wall that caught my attention. Covered in faded photographs, it depicted the faces of former patients, some smiling, others with expressions of despair. I felt a pang of empathy for these individuals, trapped in a place that had once promised healing, but had ultimately become a prison. Suddenly I heard a noise, a soft whisper that seemed to drift through the air. I turned, my heart racing, but there was no one there. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just the wind. Yet, as I continued to explore, the whispers grew louder, echoing in the empty halls. "Help us," they seemed to say, a chorus of voices pleading for attention. I felt a chill run down my spine, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I followed, the sound navigating through the maze of rooms until I reached a darkened corridor. At the end of the hallway, I found a door that was slightly ajar. The whispers were now a cacophony, urging me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, but the need to uncover the truth was too strong. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, with a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center stood an old, rusted gurney, and surrounding it were more photographs. This time they were of patients in various states of distress. My heart raced as I realized that these were not just images, they were echoes of suffering, trapped in this forsaken place. As I examined the photographs, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there, in the shadows, stood a figure, a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her eyes wide with fear. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. The woman pointed toward the gurney, her expression a mix of desperation and sorrow. "Please, you have to help us," she pleaded, her voice growing fainter. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out to her, but fear rooted me to the spot. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The truth," she replied, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "We were forgotten. We need to be remembered." In that moment, I understood. The asylum was not just a building, It was a graveyard of lost souls, trapped in a cycle of despair. I felt a surge of empathy for the woman and the others who had suffered within these walls. I knew I had to do something. I promised to tell your story, I said, my voice steadying. I will make sure you are remembered. As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers grew softer, and the woman's expression transformed from fear to gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her figure beginning to fade. You have given us hope. With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the dim room. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, as if the weight of the asylum had lifted. I knew that I had to leave, but I also knew that I would return. I would share their stories, honor their memories, and ensure that the echoes of the forgotten would never fade away. As I made my way back through the asylum, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The building, once a place of fear, had become a sanctuary of stories waiting to be told. I stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing against my skin, and I knew that I would carry the spirits of the asylum with me, forever changed by their whispers. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural. Growing up, I dismissed ghost stories as mere figments of imagination, tales spun to entertain or frighten. However, my perspective changed one fateful evening when I encountered something that defied explanation. It was a rainy Friday night, and I had just returned home from a long week at work. The sound of raindrops tapping against the window created a soothing rhythm, and I decided to unwind with a hot cup of tea. As I settled into my favorite armchair, I glanced at the antique mirror hanging on the wall opposite me. It had belonged to my grandmother, and while it was beautiful, it always gave me an uneasy feeling. As I sipped my tea, I noticed something strange in the reflection. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow, darting across the surface of the mirror. I blinked, thinking it was just my imagination, but when I looked again, the shadow was still there, lingering just out of sight. My heart raced as I leaned closer, trying to discern what I was seeing. Suddenly the shadow shifted, taking on a more defined shape. It appeared to be a figureya woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her long hair cascading down her back. I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. Was I really seeing this, or was it a trick of the light? "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel her gaze piercing through me, as if she were trying to communicate. I felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to understand what was happening. As I reached out to touch the mirror, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air, and a chill ran down my spine. The woman in the mirror began to move, her lips forming words that I couldn't hear. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, knocking over my tea. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the silence. The figure paused, her expression shifting from sorrow to urgency. She pointed toward the mirror, and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me: fear, sadness, and a deep longing. Gathering my courage, I stepped closer to the mirror once more. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier this time. The woman's eyes widened, and she gestured again, this time more insistently. In that moment, I realized that she was trying to convey something important. I focused on her, willing myself to understand. As I did, images flooded my mind, flashes of a life once lived, moments of joy and heartbreak. I saw glimpses of a family, laughter, and then a sudden darkness that enveloped it all. "Help me," she mouthed, her voice finally breaking through the barrier of silence. "Find my child." My heart sank as I processed her words. This was not just a ghostly apparition. It was a mother searching for her lost child. I felt a surge of empathy for her plight, and I knew I had to help. "Where do I start?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman pointed again, this time to a small box on the shelf beside the mirror. I hadn't noticed it before, but as I approached, I felt a strange energy emanating from it. I opened the box, revealing a collection of old photographs and letters, yellowed with age. As I sifted through the contents, I found a picture of the woman with a young girl, both smiling brightly. The name written on the back of the photo sent chills down my spine. "Lily!" "Lily," I repeated, feeling a connection to the name. "Is this your daughter?" The woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Determined to help, I began to research the history of the house and the woman in the mirror. I discovered that she had lived there many decades ago, and her daughter had mysteriously disappeared one fateful day. The case had gone cold, leaving the mother heartbroken and searching for answers. With each piece of information I uncovered, I felt the weight of the woman's sorrow pressing down on me. I knew I had to find out what happened to Lily. I reached out to local historians and searched through archives, piecing together the fragments of a tragic story. Days turned into weeks, and finally I stumbled upon a lead. A witness had come forward, claiming to have seen a girl matching Lily's description near the old park on the outskirts of town. I felt a surge of hope and knew I had to investigate. That evening, I returned to the park, the sun setting behind me. As I walked through the overgrown paths, I felt a sense of purpose guiding me. I reached a clearing where the trees parted, revealing a small pond. It was there that I felt the presence of the woman beside me, urging me to continue. I knelt by the water's edge, scanning the area for any signs of Lily. Suddenly, I noticed something glimmering beneath the surface. My heart raced as I reached in, pulling out a small locket, a delicate piece of jewelry that felt familiar. I opened it to reveal a picture of the woman and her daughter, forever captured in time. In that moment, I understood. The locket was a symbol of their bond, a connection that transcended time and space. I felt the woman's presence grow stronger, and I knew I had found what she had been searching for. As I held the locket in my hands, I whispered, "I found her. She's with you now." The air around me shifted, and I felt a warmth enveloping me, as if the woman was finally at peace. From that day on, the mirror no longer felt like a portal to the past, but rather a testament to love and loss. I kept the locket in a safe place, a reminder of the bond between a mother and her child. The shadow in the mirror had become a part of my life, a story that would never be forgotten. Growing up in the small town of Willow Creek, I was always captivated by the stories of the past. The town was steeped in history, but one mystery loomed larger than the rest: the disappearance of a young girl named Sarah Collins. It had happened decades ago, yet the whispers of her fate still echoed through the streets, sending chills down the spines of those who dared to speak of it. Sarah had vanished on a warm summer day, just days before her 12th birthday. The townsfolk searched high and low, but she was never found. Some claimed she had run away, while others believed she had fallen victim to something far more sinister. As a child, I was both terrified and fascinated by the tale, and I often found myself daydreaming about what might have happened to her. Years later, as a journalist, I returned to Willow Creek to investigate the mystery that had haunted my childhood. Armed with a notebook and a camera, I set out to uncover the truth. The town had changed little since my youth, and the familiar sights stirred a mix of nostalgia and unease within me. I began my investigation at the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. The more I read, the more questions I had. There were conflicting accounts of the day Sarah disappeared, and the details seemed to shift with each retelling. I spoke to the townsfolk, hoping to gather new insights, but most were reluctant to discuss the tragedy. It was as if the memory of Sarah was a wound that had never fully healed. One evening, as I was leaving the library, I noticed an elderly woman sitting on a bench outside. Her eyes were distant, and she seemed lost in thought. I approached her, feeling a strange pull to her presence. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said gently. "Do you remember Sarah Collins?" Her gaze snapped to mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition. "Ah, Sarah," she murmured, her voice barely above, a whisper. "Such a sweet girl. I remember the day she disappeared like it was yesterday." I sat beside her, eager to hear her story. "What do you remember?" I asked, my heart racing with anticipation. The woman took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I was one of the last people to see her. She was playing near the old oak tree by the river. I warned her not to go too close, but she laughed and ran off. That was the last time anyone saw her. Did you see anyone else around?" I pressed, sensing there was more to her story. She hesitated, her eyes clouding with memories. "There was a man, a stranger. He was lurking near the edge of the woods, watching her. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I wish I had said something." My heart raced as I absorbed her words. A stranger? This was a lead I hadn't encountered before. "Do you remember what he looked like?" I asked, my pen poised over my notebook. The woman shook her head, frustration etched on her face. "No, it was too long ago. Just a shadow in the distance. But I've always wondered if he had something to do with her disappearance." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on to something. I decided to visit the old oak tree, the last known location of Sarah. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape as I made my way to the riverbank. As I approached the tree, I felt a strange energy in the air. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, and I could almost hear the laughter of children playing. I closed my eyes, trying to connect with the spirit of the place, when suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart raced as I turned to investigate. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, but the rustling continued, growing louder. I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight illuminating the darkness. To my shock, I stumbled upon a small, weathered box half buried in the ground. My heart raced as I knelt down to examine it. I brushed away the dirt and opened the box, revealing a collection of trinket-sold toys, a locket, and a faded photograph of a young girl with a bright smile. I recognized her instantly. It was Sarah. Tears filled my eyes as I held the photograph in my hands. This was a piece of her, a fragment of her life that had been lost for so long. But what did it mean? Why was it here? As I pondered the significance of the box, I felt a presence behind me. Behind me, turned slowly, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a man with a shadowy outline, watching me intently. My heart raced as I realized this was the stranger the woman had mentioned. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking. The figure didn't respond, but took a step closer, and I felt a chill run down my spine. In that moment, I understood. This man was part of the mystery, a piece of the puzzle that had eluded me for so long. I had to confront him, to uncover the truth about Sarah's fate. "Why did you take her?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. The figure paused, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, he vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone with the echoes of the past. I felt a mix of fear and determination surge within me. I would not let Sarah's story end here. The next day, I returned to the library, armed with the photograph and the trinkets I had found. I began to dig deeper, searching for any connection between the man and Sarah's disappearance. Hours turned into days, and finally, I uncovered a Nama man who had lived in Willow Creek at the time of Sarah's disappearance, known for his erratic behavior and troubled past. With this new information, I contacted the local authorities, and they agreed to reopen the cold case. As they began their investigation, I felt a sense of hope wash over me. Sarah's story was finally being heard, and perhaps, just perhaps, the truth would come to light. Months later, I received a call from the police. They had found evidence linking the man to Sarah's disappearance, and they were pursuing leads that could finally bring closure to the case. I felt a surge of emotion as I realized that my efforts had not been in vain. As I stood by the riverbank one last time, I held the photograph tightly in my hands. I whispered a silent promise to Sarah that her story would be told, that she would not be forgotten. The mystery of Willow Creek was far from over, but I knew that I had played a part in bringing her memory back to life. In the end, it wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about honoring a young girl whose laughter had once filled the air. And as I looked out over the water, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that Sarah Collins would always be a part of Willow Creek's story. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural. Growing up, I dismissed ghost stories as mere folklore, tales spun to entertain or frighten. However, my perspective changed when I moved into an old house in Maple Grove, a quaint town known for its rich history and, as I soon discovered, its ghostly inhabitants. The house was charming, with its creaky floorboards and vintage wallpaper, but it had a reputation. The locals whispered about the ghost of a woman named Eliza, who was said to wander the halls, searching for something lost. I brushed off the stories, convinced they were just that, stories. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel an unsettling presence in the house. It started with small things, a flickering light, a cold draft that seemed to follow me from room to room. I would often catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One night, as I was settling into bed, I heard a soft whisper. It was faint, almost like a breeze brushing against my ear. "Help me," it seemed to say. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a figment of my tired mind. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of the house. I discovered that Eliza had lived there in the late 1800s. She was a young woman who had fallen in love with a local artist, but their romance was tragically cut short when he mysteriously disappeared. Heartbroken, Eliza spent the rest of her life searching for him. And after her death, her spirit was said to linger in the house, forever seeking closure. The more I learned about Eliza, the more I felt a connection to her. I decided to hold a small séance, hoping to communicate with her spirit and offer her the peace she sought. I invited a few friends over, and as we gathered in the dimly lit living room, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. We formed a circle, holding hands as I lit a candle in the center. I closed my eyes and focused on Eliza, calling out to her. "If you're here, please let us know you're with us." At first, there was silence, but then the candle flickered violently and a chill swept through the room. I opened my eyes, and to my astonishment, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the room, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the stillness. My heart raced as I realized this was Eliza. I felt a surge of empathy for her plight, and I knew I had to help. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure pointed toward the old portrait hanging on the wall, a painting of the artist, his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. In that moment, I understood. Eliza was searching for her lost love, and the portrait held the key to her heartache. I promised her that I would uncover the truth about his disappearance and bring her the closure she sought. The next day, I delved deeper into the history of the artist. I visited the local archives, poring over old newspapers and records. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon a letter written by the artist just days before he vanished. It spoke of his plans to leave town, but there was a sense of urgency in his words, as if he were being pursued by something dark. With this new information, I returned to the house, determined to find out what had happened. As I stood in front of the portrait, I felt Eliza's presence beside me, urging me to continue. I closed my eyes and focused on the energy in the room, willing the truth to reveal itself. Suddenly I felt a rush of emotions: fear, love, and a deep longing. I opened my eyes and saw Eliza standing before me, her expression a mix of hope and desperation. "Find him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew I had to act quickly. I reached out to local historians and shared my findings, hoping to uncover more about the artist's fate. Days turned into weeks, and finally, I received a call from a historian who had uncovered a hidden diary belonging to the artist. The diary revealed that he had been involved in a love triangle, and his disappearance was linked to a jealous rival. The artist had fled in fear for his life, leaving Eliza behind, unaware of his fate. I felt a surge of anger and sadness for both of them, trapped in a cycle of love and loss. With this newfound knowledge, I returned to the house one last time. As I stood in the living room, I felt Eliza's presence surrounding me, a warm embrace that filled the air. "I found him," I whispered, holding the diary tightly. "He loved you until the end." In that moment, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The shadows that had once loomed over the house began to dissipate, and I knew that Eliza had finally found the closure she had been seeking. The whispers that had haunted me for weeks faded away, replaced by a sense of peace. As I left the house, I glanced back at the portrait one last time. Eliza's spirit had been set free, and I knew that her story would live on, a testament to the power of love and the importance of closure. From that day on, the house felt different. The air was lighter, and the warmth of Eliza's spirit lingered, a reminder that even in death, love endures. I had come to understand that sometimes the past needs to be acknowledged before it can be laid to rest. I had always prided myself on my rational mind. As a psychologist, I spent my days helping others untangle the webs of their thoughts and emotions. But when I began to experience strange occurrences in my own life, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. It started, innocently enough, a misplaced item here, a forgotten appointment there. I brushed it off as the stress of work, but as the weeks went by, the incidents escalated. I would wake up to find my office papers scattered across the floor, or I'd receive phone calls from clients I had never scheduled. My colleagues noticed my growing anxiety, but I was determined to maintain my composure. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I returned home to find my front door ajar. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of my home replaced by an unsettling chill. I called out, but there was no response. I scanned the room, my instincts on high alert. Everything appeared normal, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I replayed the events of the day, searching for a rational explanation. But the more I thought, the more I felt the walls closing in around me. I decided to take a break from work, hoping that a few days away would help me regain my focus. I retreated to a cabin in the woods, seeking solitude and clarity. The first night was peaceful, the sounds of nature lulling me to sleep. But on the second night I was jolted awake by a noise, a soft tapping at the window. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping continued, rhythmic and insistent. Gathering my courage, I approached the window and peered outside. The moonlight illuminated the clearing, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, dismissing it as a figment of my imagination. Yet, as I lay back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The following day, I decided to explore the surrounding woods, hoping to clear my mind. As I wandered deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Curiosity piqued, I approached cautiously. The door creaked open, revealing a dark interior filled with dust and cobwebs. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange energy in the air. The walls were lined with faded photographs, each one depicting a different family. But what struck me was the expression on their face, haunted, as if they were trapped in a moment of despair. I felt a deep chill run down my spine. Suddenly I heard a voice, a soft whisper that seemed to echo through the cabin. "Help us!" My heart raced as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The whisper grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. "Help us! Help us!" I pressed my back against the door, my mind racing. Was this a hallucination? Had I finally lost my grip on reality? In that moment of fear, I felt a presence beside me. I turned slowly, and there, in the shadows, stood a figureya woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. "You must remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You must remember what you've forgotten." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. The woman pointed toward a photograph on the wall, a family portrait that looked eerily familiar. I squinted, trying to place the faces, but they eluded me. Suddenly memories flooded my mind, fragments of a childhood I had buried deep within. I saw flashes of laughter, warmth, and then darkness. I remembered a family gathering, a celebration that had turned into chaos. I had blocked it out, the trauma too painful to confront. "Why are you showing me this?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "I can't go back." "You must face it," the woman urged, her voice growing stronger. Only then can you help us." With a surge of determination, I approached the photograph, my heart racing. As I touched the frame, the room began to spin, and I was transported back to that fateful day. I saw myself as a child, hiding in the corner as the argument escalated. I felt the fear, the helplessness, and the overwhelming urge to escape, but then something shifted. I saw the truth, the love that had once filled our home, the laughter that had been drowned out by anger. I realized that I had the power to rewrite the narrative, to reclaim the memories that had haunted me for so long. As I faced the darkness, the voices began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. I turned to the woman, gratitude filling my heart. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice steady. "I understand now." With that, the cabin began to dissolve around me, and I found myself back in the woods, the sun shining brightly overhead. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew that I had faced my demons and emerged stronger. Returning to my life, I embraced the memories I had once feared. I sought therapy to help process the trauma, and I began to share my experiences with others. The labyrinth of my mind had been unraveled, and I was finally free. In the end, I learned that the mind can be a treacherous place, filled with shadows and echoes of the past. But by confronting those fears, we can find the light that guides us home. I had always been drawn to the unconventional, the fringe aspects of society that others dismissed as mere curiosities. So, when I heard whispers of a secretive cult operating in the nearby woods, my curiosity piqued. The locals spoke of strange rituals and eerie gatherings, but I was determined to uncover the truth behind the rumors. One crisp autumn evening, I decided to venture into the woods, armed with nothing but a flashlight and my journal. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. As I walked deeper into the forest, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could almost hear the whispers of the past echoing through the branches. After wandering for what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a circle of stones, worn and weathered by time. My heart raced as I approached, the atmosphere charged with an energy I couldn't quite explain. It was then that I noticed the remnants of a fire pit, the ashes still warm from a recent gathering. Suddenly I heard voices, soft melodic chants drifting through the air. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was both beautiful and haunting, drawing me closer to the source. I crept toward the edge of the clearing, peering through the trees. What I saw sent chills down my spine. A group of hooded figures stood in a circle, their arms raised toward the moon. They swayed gently, their chants growing louder, filling the night with an otherworldly resonance. I felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to join them, but fear held me back. As I watched, one of the figures stepped forward, revealing a face illuminated by the moonlight. It was a woman, her features striking yet unsettling. She began to speak, her voice commanding and melodic. "Tonight, we gather to honor the shadows that guide us. We seek the truth hidden within the darkness." My breath caught in my throat. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a ritual steeped in mystery and power. I felt a mix of fear and fascination. As I listened to her words, the allure of the unknown drawing me in. Suddenly a rustling in the bushes broke my concentration. I turned, heart racing, and saw a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows. Panic surged through me and I quickly ducked behind a tree, my mind racing. Had I been discovered? The chanting continued, growing more intense, and I felt a sense of urgency. I needed to know what was happening. Gathering my courage, I crept closer to the circle, careful to remain hidden. As I listened, I realized they were preparing for a sacrifice, a ritual, to appease the spirits they believed resided in the woods. My heart raced as I glanced around, searching for an escape route. I had to get out of there before it was too late. But just as I turned to leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around to find the woman from the circle standing behind me, her eyes piercing through the darkness. "You seek the truth, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and hypnotic. I stammered, trying to find my words. "To" didn't mean to intrude. I was just curious. "Curiosity can be a powerful force," she replied, a smile playing on her lips. "But it can also lead to danger. You've stumbled upon something sacred." Before I could respond, she gestured for me to
follow her. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn to her, unable to resist the magnetic pull of her presence.
She led me back to the circle where the other figures had stopped chanting and were now watching me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Welcome, Seeker," the woman said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "You have been chosen to witness our ritual. But know this: once you enter the circle, there is no turning back." My heart raced as I stepped into the circle, the energy around me shifting. The figures closed in, their faces obscured by shadows. I felt a sense of belonging, yet a deep-seated fear gnawed at my insides. The woman raised her arms and the chanting resumed, filling the air with an intoxicating rhythm. I felt myself swaying, caught in the spell of the moment. But as the energy intensified, I began to sense something darker lurking beneath the surface. Suddenly the chanting stopped, and the woman turned to me, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity.
"Are you ready to embrace the shadows?" she asked, her voice dripping with allure. Hesitated, a wave of doubt crashing over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The shadows hold the truth," she replied, stepping closer. "They reveal
the hidden desires and fears within us. To join us, you must confront your own darkness." In that moment, I felt a surge of panic. I had come seeking answers, but now I was faced with a choice that could change everything. I glanced around at the hooded figures, their faces shrouded in mystery, and I realized that I was standing at the precipice of something I couldn't fully comprehend. "I can't," I whispered, stepping back. "I need to leave." The woman's expression shifted, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. "Very well," she said, her voice cold. "But know this, the shadows will always be with you. You cannot escape them." With that, the figures parted, allowing me to exit the circle. I stumbled back into the woods, my heart racing as I fled from the clearing. The sounds of the ritual faded behind me, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As I emerged from the trees, I felt a mix of relief and regret. I had escaped the cult, but I knew that the shadows would follow me. The experience had awakened something within me, a curiosity that would linger long after I left the woods. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by the encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than I had anticipated. The allure of the cult and its rituals lingered in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that exists within us all. I realized that the shadows were not just a part of the cult, they were a part of me. and as I navigated my life, I would carry the weight of that experience, forever changed by the circle of shadows. The small town of Maplewood was known for its picturesque landscapes and tight-knit community, but beneath its charming facade lay a dark secret, the mysterious disappearance of Clara Hayes. It had been 5 years since she vanished without a trace, and the case had grown cold, leaving the townsfolk with more questions than answers. I had always been intrigued by unsolved mysteries, and Clara's case was no exception. As a journalist, I felt compelled to dig deeper into the story that had haunted Maplewood for years. Armed with my notebook and a camera, I set out to uncover the truth. My investigation began at the local library, where I pored over old newspapers and articles about Clara's disappearance. She was a bright young woman, known for her kindness and adventurous spirit. The last sighting of her was on a sunny afternoon when she went for a hike in the nearby woods. After that, she simply vanished. As I read through the articles, I noticed a pattern. Many of the townsfolk were reluctant to discuss Clara. Whispers of a curse and dark forces at play filled the air, but no one would provide concrete details. It was as if they were afraid to speak her name. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I decided to visit the woods where Clara had last been seen. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the trees as I made my way along the winding path. The air was thick with anticipation, and I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a large oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky. I felt an inexplicable pull to the tree, as if it held the answers I sought. I approached cautiously, running my fingers over the rough bark. Suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, dismissing it as my imagination. But as I turned back to the tree, I noticed something glimmering at its base. Curiosity piqued. I knelt down to investigate. It was a small silver locket, tarnished but still beautiful. I opened it to reveal a photograph of a young woman, Clara. My heart raced as I realized I had found a piece of her, a fragment of her life that had been lost in the woods. As I held the locket in my hands, I felt a chill run down my spine. I glanced around, sensing that I was not alone. The air grew heavy, and I could almost hear whispers carried by the wind. "Help me," they seemed to say. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to camp out in the woods that night. I set up my tent near the oak tree, hoping that the stillness of the night would reveal more about Clara's fate. As darkness enveloped the forest, I felt a sense of unease settle over me. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a soft voice calling my name. "Help me, please." My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. The voice was faint but insistent, echoing through the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside my tent, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Clara," I called out, my voice trembling. The only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. I felt a mix of fear and determination as I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the voice grew louder, guiding me toward a narrow path that I hadn't noticed before. I followed it, my flashlight illuminating the way. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. Finally, I reached a small clearing, and there, standing in the moonlight, was a woman in a flowing white dress. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was Clara. "Help me," she whispered, her eyes filled with sorrow. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Where have you been?" "I was lost," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to remember me. I need you to tell my story." In that moment, I understood. Clara was trapped between worlds, her spirit lingering in the woods, searching for someone to share her tale. I felt a surge of empathy for her plight, and I knew I had to help. "I promise to tell your story," I said, my voice steadying. "You will not be forgotten." As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted, and I felt a warmth enveloping me, as if Clara's spirit was finally at peace. With that, she began to fade, her figure dissolving into the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now a gentle breeze. I watched as she disappeared, leaving behind a sense of calm that filled the clearing. Next day, I returned to town, the locket safely tucked away in my pocket. I began to write Clara's story, sharing the details of her life and the mystery of her disappearance. As I spoke to the townsfolk, they began to open up, sharing their memories of Clara and the impact she had on their lives. Months later, I held a memorial for Clara in the town square, inviting everyone to come and remember her. As I spoke her name, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Clara's story had been told, and her spirit was finally free. From that day on, the woods no longer felt like a place of fear, but rather a sanctuary of memories, love, and healing. I had come to understand that sometimes the past needs to be acknowledged before it can be laid to rest. Growing up, my family was like any other, filled with laughter, love, and the occasional squabble. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension that lingered in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until my grandmother passed away that I began to unravel the tangled web of secrets that had been woven into our family's history. After her funeral, I returned to my childhood home to help my parents sort through her belongings. The house was filled with memories, each room echoing with laughter and warmth. But as we sifted through the boxes, I stumbled upon something that sent a chill down my spine. A dusty old journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the attic. Curiosity piqued. I opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, detailing her life and experiences. At first, the entries were mundane, daily routines, family gatherings, and snippets of advice. But as I delved deeper, I uncovered a darker side to her story. One entry caught my attention. "I fear for my children. There are things I cannot tell them, secrets that must remain buried." My heart raced as I read on, discovering references to a mysterious figure from her pastor man who had haunted her dreams and threatened the safety of our family. I felt a mix of fear and determination as I continued to read. My grandmother had written about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows lurking in the corners of her vision, and a sense of being watched. It was as if she had been living in a constant state of paranoia, and I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to such fear. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. I approached my parents, hoping to uncover the truth behind my grandmother's fears. But when I mentioned the journal, their expressions shifted, and I could see the tension in their eyes. "Some things are better left in the past," my mother said, her voice trembling. Your grandmother had her reasons for keeping those secrets. But I was undeterred. I needed to understand what had happened, not just for my grandmother, but for my own peace of mind. I decided to investigate further, reaching out to family, members who might have known more about the mysterious figure. As I spoke to my aunts and uncles, I began to piece together a fragmented story. They spoke in hushed tones about a man named Thomas, a family friend who had been close to my grandmother in her youth. But the details were murky, and no one seemed willing to share the full truth. Determined to uncover the mystery, I turned to old newspaper archives, searching for any mention of Thomas. What I found sent chills down my spine, a series of articles detailing a string of disappearances in our town during the time my grandmother was growing up. Each article mentioned a man fitting Thomas's description, a man who had been linked to the cases but had never been charged. With each revelation, I felt the weight of my grandmother's fears pressing down on me. I realized that the secrets she had kept were not just her own, they were a part of our family's legacy, a legacy that had been shrouded in darkness for far too long. One evening, as I sat in the attic, surrounded by my grandmother's belongings, I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a shadow flickering in the corner of the room. My heart raced as I realized it was the same feeling my grandmother had described in her journal, the sensation of being watched. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow shifted, and I felt a rush of cold air enveloping me. "What do you want?" In that moment I understood. The secrets of the past were not just memories. They were alive, lingering in the spaces we inhabited. I felt a surge of determination as I reached for the journal, flipping through the pages until I found the entry that spoke of Thomas. "I will uncover the truth," I whispered, my voice steady. "I will not let your fears go unheard." The following days were filled with research and conversations with family members. I learned that my grandmother had cut ties with Thomas after he had become increasingly erratic, his behavior raising alarms among those who knew him. But the fear of his influence had lingered, casting a shadow over our family for generations. Finally, I decided to confront my parents once more. I gathered them in the living room, the journal open on the coffee table before us. "We need to talk about Thomas," I said, my voice firm. "We can't keep these secrets any longer." My mother's eyes filled with tears as she recounted her own experiences with Thomas, the fear gripped her as a child. My father spoke of the tension that had permeated their marriage, the unspoken worries that had haunted them both. As we shared our stories, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over us. The secrets that had once divided us began to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding of the past. We realized that by confronting the darkness, we could finally begin to heal. In the weeks that followed, I continued to write about my grandmother's story, weaving together the threads of her life and the secrets she had kept. I shared the journal with my family, allowing them to see the woman behind the fears, the woman who had loved us fiercely despite the shadows that loomed over her. As I closed the final chapter of my grandmother's story, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The secrets we had kept for so long were finally laid to rest, and I knew that my grandmother's spirit would be free. From that day on, I carried her legacy with me, a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth uncovering. The shadows of the past may linger, but they no longer held power over us. We had faced them together, and in doing so, we had forged a stronger bond as a family. had always been a curious person drawn to the unknown and the forbidden. So, when I first heard about the dark web, I felt an irresistible urge to explore its depths. It was a place shrouded in mystery, filled with whispers of illicit activities and hidden truths. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me down a path I could never have anticipated. One rainy evening, I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the glow of my computer screen illuminating the room. I had spent hours researching how to access the dark web, following guides and tutorials that promised a glimpse into a world beyond the reach of ordinary browsers. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I downloaded the Tor browser and prepared to dive in. As I navigated through the hidden corners of the internet, I stumbled upon forums and marketplaces that offered everything from illegal drugs to hacking services. My heart raced as I scrolled through the listings, each one more shocking than the last. I felt like an explorer in uncharted territory, but a nagging sense of unease began to creep in. It wasn't long before I came across a thread titled The Abyss. Intrigued, I clicked on it, and my screen filled with cryptic messages and eerie images. The users spoke in hushed tones about a mysterious figure known only as the Architect, who was said to orchestrate a series of dark and twisted games. The more I read, the more I felt drawn into the web of intrigue. One user claimed that the Architect had a way of finding those who dared to seek him out. "If you're brave enough, send a message to the address below," they wrote, followed by a string of numbers and letters. My heart raced at the thought of reaching out, but a voice in my head warned me to turn back. Curiosity won out, and I found myself typing a message, my fingers trembling as I hit send. To my surprise, I received an immediate response. The message was simple. "Welcome to the game. Are you ready to play?" My pulse quickened as I realized I had crossed a line. I hesitated, but the thrill of the unknown pushed me forward. I replied, "What do I need to do?" The Architect's response was chilling. "Find the key, it's hidden in plain sight." A link followed, leading to a seemingly innocuous website. I clicked on it, and my screen filled with a series of image pictures of everyday objects, each one accompanied by a riddle. I spent hours deciphering the clues, my mind racing as I pieced together the puzzle. Each riddle led me deeper into the game, and with each solved clue, I felt a sense of exhilaration. But as the night wore on, I began to feel a growing sense of dread. The riddles became darker, hinting at secrets that should have remained buried. Finally, I reached the last clue, which directed me to a location in my city, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts. My heart raced as I contemplated the implications. Was this a trap? I felt a mix of fear and excitement, but the thrill of the game was too enticing to resist. The next evening, I found myself standing in front of the warehouse, the air thick with tension. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But the allure of the unknown pulled me forward. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The interior was dimly lit, and I could barely make out the shapes of old machinery and crates. I felt a chill run down my spine as I ventured deeper, the silence amplifying my unease. Suddenly I heard a noise, a soft whisper that seemed to echo through the shadows. "Welcome," a voice said, sending shivers down my spine. I turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness, cloaked in shadows. "You've come to play?" My heart raced as I realized I was face to face with the Architect. "What do you want from me?"
I stammered, fear gripping my chest. He stepped closer, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and menace. You sought the truth, didn't you? You wanted to see what lies beneath the surface. I felt a surge of panic as I realized the gravity of my situation.
I didn't mean to, too late, he interrupted, a sinister smile spreading across his face. You've already played your part. Now, you must face the consequences. Before I could react, the lights flickered on, revealing a room filled with screens displaying live feeds from various locations around the city. My heart sank as I realized what I was witnessing: people being watched, their lives unfolding in real time, completely unaware of the eyes upon them. This is the abyss, the architect said, gesturing to the screens. A world where secrets are laid bare, and nothing is as it seems. You wanted to know the truth, and now you must decide what to do with it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I processed the horror of what I had stumbled into. I want...
Out! I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. The architect's expression shifted, a flicker of
disappointment crossing his face. You can't unsee what you've seen. The game has already begun and there's no turning back. In that moment, I realized the true nature of the dark web. It was a labyrinth of secrets and shadows, a place where curiosity could lead to unimaginable consequences. I had ventured too far, and now I was trapped in a world I couldn't escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and bolted for the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the architect's laughter echoing behind me as I raced through the warehouse, desperate to escape the nightmare I had unwittingly entered. I burst through the door and into the night, gasping for breath as I stumbled away from the warehouse. The city felt different now, the shadows lurking in every corner. I had seen too much, and I knew that the darkness would follow me. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the weight of what I had experienced hung over me like a shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the architect was always one step behind. I deleted my accounts, erased my digital footprint, and vowed never to return to the dark web. But the memories lingered, a haunting reminder of the abyss I had glimpsed. I had learned the hard way that some secrets are better left undiscovered, and that curiosity can lead to a darkness from which there is no escape. Growing up in the small town of Black Hollow, I was no stranger to the tales of strange creatures that roamed the nearby woods. The stories of the beast of Black Hollow were whispered among the townsfolk, a creature said to be a monstrous hybrid of man and beast, lurking in the shadows and preying on the unsuspecting. As a child, I dismissed these tales as mere folklore, but as I grew older, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to them. One summer evening, my friends and I decided to venture into the woods, eager to prove our bravery and uncover the truth behind the legend. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, we set off, laughter echoing through the trees as we made our way deeper into the forest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere shifted. The once familiar sounds of the woods faded into an unsettling silence, and an eerie fog began to roll in, enveloping us in a thick blanket of grey. My heart raced as I glanced at my friends, their faces reflecting a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Are you guys sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should head back." "Nah, we're fine," Jake replied, his bravado masking his own unease. "Let's just go a little further. We'll be legends if we find the beast." With a reluctant nod, I followed them deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature lurking behind us. Suddenly a rustling sound broke the silence and we froze in our tracks. My heart raced as I strained to listen. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Probably just a deer," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. We exchanged nervous glances and I could see the fear creeping into their eyes. Just as we were about to turn back, a low growl echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. It was deep and guttural, unlike anything I had ever heard before. Panic surged through me and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. "Let's get out of here!" I shouted, but before we could move, a massive shadow emerged from the fog. The beast of Black Hollow stood before us, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It was a hulking figure, covered in matted fur, with elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws. I felt my heart drop as the creature let out a bone-chilling roar, and instinct took over. We turned and sprinted through the woods, branches scratching
at our skin as we raced for safety. The growls of the beast echoed behind us, growing louder with each passing moment. "Keep running!"
Jake yelled, his voice filled with terror. We dashed through the underbrush, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the creature crashing through the trees, its pursuit relentless. As we stumbled into a clearing, I spotted an old cabin in the distance.
"Over there!" I shouted, pointing toward the structure. We sprinted toward it, praying it would provide some semblance of safety. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with the remnants
of a long, abandoned life. We huddled together, our hearts racing as we listened for the creature outside. The growls grew closer, and I could hear the sound of claws scraping against the wooden door. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "We need to find something to defend ourselves," I replied, scanning the room for anything that could help. My eyes landed on an old hunting rifle propped against the wall, its barrel rusted but still intact. I grabbed the rifle and checked for ammunition, my hands shaking as I loaded it. "If it comes in here, we'll have to fight," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Just then, the door splintered under. The weight of the beast's assault, the growls turned into a furious roar, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I prepared to face the creature. The door flew open, and the beast of Black Hollow lunged into the cabin, its eyes filled with primal rage. I raised the rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. "Get back!" I shouted, pulling the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the cabin, and the creature staggered back, letting out a pained howl. In that moment of chaos, we seized the opportunity to escape. We bolted past the beast, racing out of the cabin and into the woods. The adrenaline coursed through my veins as we ran, the sounds of the creature fading behind us. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the town, breathless and shaken. As we collapsed onto the pavement, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and disbelief. We had faced the legend, and somehow we had survived. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of the beast. The encounter had changed me, and I realized that the stories of Black Hollow were more than just folklore. They were warnings of the darkness that lurked in the shadows. Though I never returned to the woods, the legend of the beast of Black Hollow lived on in my mind, a reminder that some mysteries are best left unexplored. The darkness may be alluring, but it can also be deadly, and I had learned that curiosity can lead to encounters that haunt you for a lifetime. My family was like any other, filled with laughter, love, and the occasional squabble. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension that lingered in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until my grandmother passed away that I began to unravel the tangled web of secrets woven into our family's history. After her funeral, I returned to my childhood home to help my parents sort through her belongings. The house was filled with memories, each room echoing with laughter and warmth. But as we sifted through the boxes, I stumbled upon something that sent a chill down my spine. A dusty old journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the attic. Curiosity piqued, I opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, detailing her life and experiences. At first, the entries were mundane daily routines, family gatherings, and snippets of advice. But as I delved deeper, I uncovered a darker side to her story. One entry caught my attention. I fear for my children. There are things I cannot tell them, secrets that must remain buried. My heart raced as I read on, discovering references to a mysterious figure from her pastor man who had haunted her dreams and threatened the safety of our family. I felt a mix of fear and determination as I continued to read. My grandmother had written about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows lurking in the corners of her vision, and a sense of being watched. It was as if she had been living in a constant state of paranoia, and I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to such fear. That night I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. I approached my parents, hoping to uncover the truth behind my grandmother's fears. But when I mentioned the journal, their expressions shifted, and I could see the tension in their eyes. "Some things are better left in the past," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Your grandmother had her reasons for keeping those secrets." But I was undeterred. I needed to understand what had happened, not just for my grandmother, but for my own peace of mind. I decided to investigate further, reaching out to family members who might have known more about the mysterious figure. As I spoke to my aunts and uncles, I began to piece together a fragmented story. They spoke in hushed tones about a man named Thomas, a family friend who had been close to my grandmother in her youth. But the details were murky, and no one seemed willing to share the full truth. Determined to uncover the mystery, I turned to old newspaper archives, searching for any mention of Thomas. What I found sent chills down my spine, a series of articles detailing a string of disappearances in our town during the time my grandmother was growing up. Each article mentioned a man fitting Thomas's description, a man who had been linked to the cases but had never been charged. With each revelation, I felt the weight of my grandmother's fears pressing down on me. I realized that the secrets she had kept were not just her own. They were a part of our family's legacy, a legacy that had been shrouded in darkness for far too long. One evening, as I sat in the attic, surrounded by my grandmother's belongings, I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a shadow flickering in the corner of the room. My heart raced as I realized it was the same feeling my grandmother had described in her journal, the sensation of being watched. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow shifted and I felt a rush of cold air enveloping me. "What do you want?" In that moment, I understood. The secrets of the past were not just memories, they were alive, lingering in the spaces we'd inhabited. I felt a surge of determination as I reached for the journal, flipping through the pages until I found the entry that spoke of Thomas. "I will uncover the truth," I whispered, my voice steady. "I will not let your fears go unheard." The following days were filled with research and conversations with family members. I learned that my grandmother had cut ties with Thomas after he had become increasingly erratic, his behavior raising alarms among those who knew him. But the fear of his influence had lingered, casting a shadow over our family for generations. Finally, I decided to confront my parents once more. I gathered them in the living room, the journal open on the coffee table before us. "We need to talk about Thomas," I said, my voice firm. "We can't keep these secrets any longer." My mother's eyes filled with tears as she recounted her own experiences with Thomas, the fear that had gripped her as a child. My father spoke of the tension that had permeated their marriage, the unspoken worries that had haunted them both. As we shared our stories, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over
us. The secrets that had once divided us began to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding of the past. We realized that by confronting the darkness, we could finally begin to heal. In the weeks that followed, I continued to write about my
grandmother's story, weaving together the threads of her life and the secrets she had kept. I shared the journal with my family, allowing them to see the woman behind the fears, the woman who had loved us fiercely despite the shadows that loomed over her. As I closed the final chapter of my grandmother's story, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The secrets we had kept for so long were finally laid to rest, and I knew that my grandmother's spirit would be free. From that day on, I carried her legacy with me, a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth uncovering. The shadows of the past may linger, but they no longer held power over us. We had faced them together, and in doing so, we had forged a stronger bond as a family. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of my fears. It started on a night like any other. I had just returned home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted. As I crawled into bed, I hoped for a peaceful night's sleep, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I was thrust into a world of darkness. In my dream, I found myself in a shadowy room, the air thick with an oppressive weight. I could feel a presence lurking just beyond my line of sight, watching me with malevolent
intent. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips.
Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in my own mind. Suddenly I awoke, or so I thought. I lay in bed, unable to move, my body frozen in place. The room was dark, and I could feel a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I struggled to breathe, my heart racing as I fought against the invisible force holding me down. That's when I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by darkness. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, and a chill ran down my spine. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The figure began to move closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel the air grow colder, and I knew I was facing something otherworldly. In that moment, I understood that this was no ordinary nightmare. It was a manifestation of my deepest fears. As the figure loomed over
me, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I focused all my energy on breaking free from the paralysis. With a final, desperate effort, I willed my body to move.
To my surprise, I managed to lift my arm, and the moment I did, the figure vanished into thin air. I sat up in bed, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent, and the oppressive weight had lifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. In the days that followed, I researched sleep paralysis, hoping to find answers. I learned that many people experience similar episodes, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations. But knowing that I wasn't alone didn't ease my fears. Each night, I dreaded the possibility of facing the figure again. One evening, I decided to confront my fears head-on. I set up a camera in my bedroom, hoping to capture any strange occurrences while I slept. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I would not let the darkness control me. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself back in the shadowy room. The figure appeared once more, its presence more menacing than before. This time, I was ready. I focused on my breathing, reminding myself that I had the power to break free. When the paralysis set in, I felt the familiar weight on my chest, but instead of succumbing to fear, I concentrated on moving my fingers. Slowly, I managed to lift my hand, and the figure began to fade. "You have no power over me," I whispered, my voice steady. With that declaration, the figure vanished completely, and I awoke in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. Later that day, I reviewed the footage from the camera. To my shock, I saw the figure standing at the foot of my bed, its shadowy form flickering in and out of existence. But what struck me most was the moment I had broken free. The figure recoiled as if it had been struck, and then it disappeared entirely. From that day on, I no longer feared sleep paralysis. I understood that it was a manifestation of my mind, a reflection of my anxieties and insecurities. I learned to confront my fears, both in my dreams and in my waking life. Though the nightmares still came, I faced them with newfound strength. I had learned that the darkness could be conquered, and that I held the power to reclaim my nights. The figure of the Night Stalker no longer haunted me. Instead, it became a symbol of my resilience. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid and terrifying, often leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of my fear. It started on a night like any other. I had gone to bed exhausted after a long day, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. As I drifted off, I felt the familiar heaviness settle over me, a sensation that often accompanied my dreams. But this time, something felt different. I awoke in the middle of the night, unable to move. My body was frozen, trapped in a state between sleep and wakefulness. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free, but it was as if an invisible weight pressed down on my chest. That's when I saw a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by the darkness. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, and a sense of dread washed over me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The figure began to move closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel the air grow colder, and a whisper echoed in my mind, a chilling voice that seemed to come from
nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot escape." That moment, I felt a surge of terror. I had heard stories of sleep paralysis, of people encountering dark entities during these episodes, but I had never believed them.
Now, I was living it. As the figure loomed over me, I focused all my energy on breaking free. I willed my body to move, to wake up from this nightmare. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I managed to twitch my fingers, and that small movement broke the spell. I gasped for breath as I shot up in bed, the figure vanishing into thin air. Shaken, I turned on the light, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, a trick of my mind, but the fear lingered, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep easily again. The following nights were filled with anxiety. I dreaded going to bed, fearing that the figure would return. I tried everything, sleeping with the lights on, avoiding caffeine, even practicing relaxation techniques. But nothing seemed to help. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I finally succumbed to sleep. As I drifted off, I felt the familiar heaviness settle over me once more.
I tried to fight it, but exhaustion took over, and I slipped into unconsciousness. This time, I awoke again in the dark, unable to move. The panic set in, and I felt the weight on my chest return. I knew what was coming, and I braced myself for
the figure's arrival. When it appeared, I was ready. I focused on my breathing, willing myself to stay calm. The figure approached, its presence just as suffocating as before. But this time, I refused to let fear take hold. "Leave me alone,"
I shouted in my mind, willing the words to escape my lips.
To my surprise, the figure hesitated, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. With newfound determination, I concentrated on moving my body. I focused on my fingers, willing them to twitch, and finally, I felt a surge of energy. I managed to lift my arm, and as I did, the figure recoiled, its form dissipating into the shadows. I woke up, gasping, the light from my bedside lamp illuminating the room. I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. I had faced the nightmare and fought back. In the days that followed, I researched sleep paralysis and the phenomenon of night terrors. I learned that many people experience similar encounters, and I found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. I began to keep a dream journal documenting my experiences and working through my fears. As I continued to confront my nightmares, I noticed a shift. The dark figure no longer haunted my dreams, and I felt a sense of empowerment. I had taken control of my mind, and the nightmares that once held me captive were losing their grip. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I closed my eyes, ready to embrace whatever dreams awaited me. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, and I knew that I could conquer anything that came my way. From that night on, I slept soundly, free from the fear that had once consumed me. The nightmares had transformed from a source of terror into a reminder of my strength. I had learned that even in the darkest moments, I had the power to fight back and reclaim my peace. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of fear that the night could bring. It started innocently enough, a dream of falling, the sensation of weightlessness followed by a jarring impact. I would wake up, heart racing, and tell myself it was just a dream. But as the weeks turned into months, the nightmares grew darker, more sinister. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I fell into a deep sleep. I found myself in a familiar, dreamscape, a dark, twisted version of my childhood home. The walls were warped, and shadows danced in the corners, whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the source of my fear. Suddenly I heard a soft voice calling my name. "Come play with me," it beckoned, sweet yet chilling. I turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, a child with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Panic surged through me as I realized I was not alone. "Who are you?" I shouted, but the figure only giggled, stepping closer. I turned to run, but the darkness enveloped me and I felt
a weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move, I was trapped. In that moment, I was jolted awake, gasping for air. But as I opened my eyes, I realized I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, as if an invisible force was holding me down. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped
my lips. The room was dark, and I could feel a presence looming over me. The figure from my dream materialized in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. I felt a surge of terror as I struggled against the invisible restraints, but it was futile. "Let me go," I managed to scream internally, but the words never left my mouth. The figure stepped closer, its twisted smile widening as it reached out a hand. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, and I knew I was facing something beyond my comprehension. Just when I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, I remembered a technique I had read about focusing on my breathing, willing my body to move. I concentrated with every ounce of strength I had, and slowly I felt the weight begin to lift. With a final push, I broke free from the paralysis and bolted upright in bed, heart racing. The room was silent, and the figure was gone. I took a moment to collect myself, the remnants of fear still clinging to me. I knew I had to confront this darkness, to understand what was happening to me. In the days that followed, I researched sleep paralysis and the phenomenon of night terrors. I learned that many people experience similar episodes, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations, but knowing I wasn't alone didn't ease my fear. If anything, it intensified it. That night, I decided to face my fears head-on. I set up a camera in my room, hoping to capture any strange occurrences while I slept. As I lay in bed, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I would not let the darkness control me. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself back in the dreamscape, the familiar twisted version of my home. The shadows loomed larger, and I could feel the weight of dread pressing down on me once more. But this time, I was prepared. "Show yourself!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice echoing through the void. The figure appeared again, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "You cannot escape," it taunted, but I stood my ground. "I'm not afraid of you," I declared, my voice steady. "You have no power over me." To my surprise, the figure hesitated, its twisted smile faltering. I felt a surge of confidence as I pressed on. "You are a part of my mind and I control you. You
cannot hurt me." With each word, I felt the darkness begin to recede. The shadows that had once felt suffocating now seemed to shrink away, and the figure's form wavered. "No!" it screamed, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot banish me!" But I refused to back down. "I am stronger than you," I shouted, and with that, I focused all my energy on dispelling the darkness. The figure let out a final, anguished cry before dissolving into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the light. I awoke in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the window. The weight of fear had lifted, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced my nightmares and emerged victorious.
In the days that followed, I continued to sleep with the camera running, but the night terrors never returned. I had confronted the darkness within me, and in doing so I had reclaimed my power. Though I knew that nightmares could return, I felt a newfound strength. I had learned that the mind can be a treacherous place, but by facing our fears, we can find the light that guides us through the darkness. I had always been a restless sleeper, but it wasn't until I moved into my new apartment that I began to experience something far more sinister, nightmares that felt all too real and sleep paralysis that left me frozen in terror. The first night, in my new home, I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the move. But as the clock struck 3, I was jolted awake by an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, as if it were pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free, but it was as if I were trapped in a nightmare. In the dim light of my bedroom, I could see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall and indistinct, its features obscured by darkness. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound escaped my lips. I was utterly paralyzed, caught in a waking nightmare. The figure began to move closer, and I felt a cold breath wash over me. My heart raced as I fought against the invisible weight holding me down. Just when I thought I would suffocate under the pressure, the figure vanished, and I was released from the grip of paralysis. I bolted upright in bed, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The next day, I brushed off the experience as a product of stress and exhaustion, but that night it happened again. I fell asleep easily, but once more I awoke to the familiar sensation of being unable to move. The figure returned, closer this time, its presence suffocating. I could feel its cold gaze boring into me, and I was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. This time, I managed to let out a muffled cry, but it was swallowed by the silence of the night. The figure lingered for what felt like an eternity, before finally dissipating, leaving me trembling in the darkness. I was terrified, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment. I convinced myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. As the nights passed, the visits became more frequent. I began to dread sleep, knowing that I would be subjected to the same torment. I tried everything, sleeping with the lights on, playing soothing music, even seeking advice from friends. But nothing worked. The figure continued to haunt me, growing bolder with each encounter. One night I decided to confront it. I was tired of living in fear, and I wanted to understand what was happening. As I lay in bed, I focused on the figure, willing it to appear. When I felt the familiar weight pressing down on me, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Who
Are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the silence. "What do you want from me?" To my surprise, the figure paused.
I felt a shift in the air, as if it were considering my words. Slowly, it began to take shape, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign. It was a woman, her features twisted in anguish, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm trapped." My heart raced as I processed her words. "Trapped? How can I help you?" I asked, my fear giving way to curiosity. "I need you to remember," she replied, her voice growing fainter. "You must remember what happened." In that moment, I felt a rush of memories flooding back, fragments of my childhood, moments of fear and loss that I had buried deep within. I remembered a time when I had lost someone dear to me, a friend who had vanished without a trace. The pain of that loss had haunted me for years, and I had pushed it aside, unwilling to confront the grief. As the realization washed over me, the figure began to fade. "You must face the truth," she urged, her voice echoing in the darkness. "Only then can you be free." With that, I awoke, gasping for breath. The room was bathed in the soft glow of morning light, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. That day, I sought out the memories I had long avoided. I visited the places we used to go, spoke to old friends, and allowed myself to grieve for the loss I had buried. It was painful, but with each step, I felt the weight
of the figure's presence lift. That night, I lay in bed, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a warmth envelop me, a comforting presence that filled the room. I closed my eyes and,
for the first time, I welcomed the darkness. When I awoke the next morning, I felt different, lighter, freer. The nightmares had ceased, and the figure no longer haunted my dreams. I had faced my fears and embraced the truth, and in doing so, I had found my way back to myself. The experience had changed me, and I realized that sometimes the shadows we fear are simply echoes of our past, waiting for us to confront them. I had learned that facing our nightmares can lead to healing, and that the darkness is not something to be feared, but rather a part of our journey toward understanding. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid and terrifying, often leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths
of my fears. It was a chilly autumn night when it happened. I had just returned home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted.
As I lay in bed, I quickly drifted off to sleep, unaware that I was about to enter a realm of terror. I found myself in a familiar dreamscape, a dark, twisted version of my childhood home. The walls were warped, and shadows danced in the corners of the rooms. I wandered through the hallways, a sense of dread creeping over me. I could hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, echoing through the air. Suddenly I felt a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. Panic surged through me as I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was awake, yet trapped in my own body, unable to scream or escape. As I lay there, I noticed a figure emerging from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by darkness. My heart raced as it approached, a sinister smile stretching
across its face. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place. "Help me!" I tried to cry out, but no sound escaped my lips.
The figure leaned closer, its breath cold against my skin. I could feel its presence enveloping me, a suffocating darkness that threatened to consume me. In that moment, I remembered the stories I had heard about sleep paralysis, the tales of the night stalker, a malevolent entity that preyed on those who experienced this phenomenon. I had always dismissed them as mere folklore, but now I was living my worst nightmare. The figure reached out, its long fingers brushing against my cheek. I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me, and I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up. But the darkness only deepened, and I felt myself slipping further into despair. Just when I thought I would be lost forever, a flicker of light broke through the shadows. I focused on it, willing myself to move toward the brightness. With a surge of determination, I fought against the paralysis, pushing with every ounce of strength I had. Finally, I broke free. I shot up in bed, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dimly lit, and I could still feel the remnants of the nightmare clinging to me. I glanced around, half expecting to see the figure lurking in the corners, but I was alone. Shaken, I tried to shake off the experience, convincing myself it was just a dream. But as the days turned into weeks, the nightmares continued, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. The Night Stalker became a recurring presence, haunting my sleep and leaving me in a state of constant fear. Desperate for answers, I began researching sleep paralysis and its connection to nightmares. I discovered that many people had experienced similar encounters, often describing the same figure, dark, shadowy entity that instilled fear and dread. Determined to reclaim my sleep, I sought help from a therapist who specialized in dream analysis. During our sessions, I learned techniques to confront my fears and regain control over my dreams. I practiced visualization exercises and kept a dream journal, hoping to understand the messages hidden within my nightmares. One night, after weeks of preparation, I finally felt ready to face the Night Stalker. As I drifted off to sleep, I focused on the light I had seen during my last encounter, willing it to guide me through the darkness. When the familiar weight pressed down on my chest, I recognized it immediately. I was back in the dreamscape, the shadows swirling around me. But this time, I was determined not to succumb to fear. The figure emerged from the darkness, its smile as sinister as ever. But instead of cowering, I stood my ground. "You have no power over me," I declared, my voice steady. "I am not afraid." To my surprise, the figure hesitated, its expression shifting from amusement to confusion. I took a step forward, the light within me growing stronger. "You are just a manifestation of my fears. I will not let you control me." With each word, the darkness began to recede, the shadows shrinking away from the light I radiated. The Night Stalker's smile faltered, and I felt a surge of empowerment wash over me. As the figure dissolved into the shadows, I awoke in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. I felt a sense of relief and triumph, knowing that I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. From that day on, the nightmares lessened, and the Night Stalker became a distant memory. I had learned that the darkness could only hold power if I allowed it to. By confronting my fears, I had reclaimed my sleep and my life. Though the experience had been terrifying, it had also taught me a valuable lesson about the strength that lies within us all. The mind can be a labyrinth of shadows, but with courage and determination, we can find our way back to the light. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid and terrifying, often leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths
of my fears. It was a chilly autumn night when it happened. I had just returned home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted. As I crawled into bed, I felt a sense of relief wash over me.
Little did I know that the night would take a dark turn. I drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't long before I found myself in that familiar, nightmarish realm. I was standing in a dark, foggy landscape, the air thick with an unsettling silence. Shadows danced around me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were weighed down by an unseen force. Suddenly, I heard a low growl behind me. My heart raced as I turned to see a figure emerging. From the shadows, a tall, menacing silhouette with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. Panic surged through me and I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. Just as the figure lunged toward me, I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, but something felt off. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped in a state of sleep paralysis. The room was dimly lit, and I could see the outline of my bedroom furniture, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air grew heavy, and I felt a presence looming over me. I strained to turn my head, and that's when I saw it, the figure from my nightmare, standing at the foot of my bed. It was the same tall silhouette, its glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I was completely at its mercy. The figure began to move closer, its form shifting and distorting as it approached. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, and I fought against the paralysis with every ounce of strength I had. Finally, I managed to let out a choked gasp, and in that moment, the figure hesitated. "Help me," it whispered, its voice a haunting echo that reverberated through the room. I felt a strange mix of fear and empathy as I stared into its glowing eyes. Was this creature a manifestation of my nightmares, or was it something more? With a surge of determination, I focused on breaking free from the paralysis. I willed my body to move, and slowly I felt the weight lift. I sat up in bed, gasping for breath, but the figure was gone. The room was empty, yet the air still felt charged with an unsettling energy. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still watching me. I began to research sleep paralysis and the phenomenon of night terrors, discovering that many people experience similar encounters. Some claimed that the figures they saw were manifestations of their deepest fears, while others believed they were actual entities from another realm. Determined to confront my fears, I decided to keep a dream journal. Each morning, I would write down my nightmares, hoping to gain insight into their meaning. As I documented my experiences, I began to notice a pattern. The figure always appeared when I was feeling particularly stressed or anxious. One night, after a particularly exhausting week, I found myself back in that dark landscape. This time, I was prepared. As the figure emerged from the shadows, I stood my ground, refusing to let fear consume me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady, despite the terror coursing through me. The figure paused, its glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty.
I am the darkness you fear," it replied, its voice echoing like a distant thunder. "But I am also a part of you." In that moment, I understood. The figure was not just a monster, it was a reflection of my own insecurities and anxieties. I had been running from it for too long, and it was time to confront the darkness within. "I won't let you control me anymore," I declared, my voice growing stronger. "I accept you as a part of me, but you will not define me." As I spoke those words, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, its form fading away. I felt a sense of liberation wash over me, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The darkness that had once haunted me was now a part of my journey, a reminder that I had the power to face my fears. When I woke up the next morning, I felt different, lighter, freer. The nightmares still came, but they no longer held the same power over me. I had learned to embrace the darkness, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. From that day on, I continued to keep my dream journal, documenting my experiences and reflecting on my emotions. The figure may have been a
manifestation of my fears, but it had also become a source of strength, a reminder that I could face the shadows and emerge victorious. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of my fears. It started on a night like any other. I had just settled into bed, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting comforting shadows across the room. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, but that tranquility was short-lived. I awoke in the middle of the night, unable to move. My body felt heavy, as if it were pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Panic surged through me as I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The darkness around me felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. Then I saw Ita, shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall and indistinct, its features obscured by the darkness. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I wanted to look away, to escape, but I was trapped in my own body. Help me, I thought, desperate for someone to hear my silent plea. But the figure remained motionless, its presence suffocating.
I felt as if I were being drawn into a void, the darkness threatening to consume me. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the figure began to move. It glided closer, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. I could feel its cold
breath on my face, and I fought against the paralysis with every ounce of strength I had. Suddenly I jolted awake, gasping for air. The room was bathed in the soft light of dawn, and I was drenched in sweat. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. Had it been a dream, a hallucination? I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still lurking in the shadows. In the days that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. I avoided sleeping, fearing that the nightmares would return. But exhaustion took its toll, and eventually I succumbed to sleep once more. That night, the cycle repeated itself. I found myself paralyzed, unable to move as the shadowy figure returned. This time, it loomed closer, its presence more oppressive than before. I could feel its anger, a palpable force that filled the room with dread. "Why are you doing this?" I thought, desperate for answers. But the figure remained silent, its intentions shrouded in mystery. As the nights wore on, I began to research sleep paralysis, hoping to find some explanation for my torment. I learned that many people experience similar episodes, often accompanied by hallucinations. But knowing that I wasn't alone didn't ease my fear. One evening, I decided to confront my fears. I set up a camera in my room, hoping to capture evidence of the figure that haunted me. I wanted to understand what was happening, to take back control of my life. That night, I fell asleep with the camera rolling, my heart pounding in anticipation. When I awoke, I felt the familiar weight pressing down on me. The figure was back, but this time I was determined to face it. "Show yourself," I thought, willing myself to break free from the paralysis. The figure moved closer, and I could see its form beginning to solidify. It was no longer just a shadow. It had features, eyes that glowed like embers, and a mouth twisted into a sinister grin. In that moment, I felt a surge of anger. "You don't control me," I shouted silently, channeling all my fear into defiance. With a sudden burst of energy, I broke free from the paralysis, sitting up in bed. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I reached for the camera, desperate to capture the moment. But as I turned to film, the figure vanished, leaving only the lingering chill in the air. The next day, I reviewed the footage, my heart racing with anticipation. As I watched, I saw myself lying in bed, eyes wide open, but there was no sign of the figure. It was as if it had never been there at all. Frustration washed over me. Had it all been in my mind? I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still out there, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. That night, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of fearing the figure, I would invite it to reveal itself. I lit candles around my room, creating a calming atmosphere, and sat in meditation, focusing on my breath. As I entered a trance-like state, I felt a shift in the energy around me. The shadows deepened, and I sensed the figure approaching. This time, I didn't
resist.
I welcomed it, willing it to show me its true form. The figure materialized before me, and I felt a rush of emotions: fear, anger, sadness. But beneath it all, I sensed a longing, a desire for connection. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady. To my surprise, the figure began to speak, its voice a low whisper that echoed in my mind. "I am a reflection of your fears, your doubts. I exist because you allow me to." In that moment, I understood. The figure was not a malevolent force. It was a manifestation of my own insecurities and anxieties. I had given it power by allowing it to control my thoughts. With newfound clarity, I took a deep breath and released the fear that had held me captive for so long. "You have no power over me," I declared, my voice strong and unwavering. As I spoke those words, the figure began to dissolve, its form fading into the shadows. I felt a sense of liberation wash over me, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. From that night on, the nightmares ceased. I learned to embrace my fears rather than let them control me. The figure that had once haunted me became a symbol of my strength, a reminder that I had the power to confront the darkness within. As I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace enveloping me. I had faced my nightmares and emerged victorious, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But nothing could prepare me for the night I encountered sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that would forever change my perception of reality. It was a stormy night, the wind howling outside my window as I settled into bed. I had just finished a long week at work, and exhaustion weighed heavily on my eyelids. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of unease creeping in, but I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just the remnants of a stressful day. Suddenly, I jolted awake, my heart racing. I couldn't move. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in my own body, unable to speak or even blink. The room was dark, the shadows dancing ominously in the corners. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. Then I felt utter presence in the room with me. My breath quickened as I strained to see through the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form indistinct but undeniably menacing. It hovered at the foot of my bed, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "Help!
Me!" I tried to cry out, but the words were trapped in my throat. The figure moved closer, its features becoming clearer. It was a woman, her face twisted in anguish, her eyes wide with terror. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized
She was not just a figment of my imagination. She was a ghostly apparition, a spirit trapped in a nightmare of her own. In that moment, I understood I was not alone in my suffering. The woman reached out to me, her hand trembling as she pointed toward the corner of the room. I followed her gaze and saw a dark shape lurking in the shadows, a creature that seemed to feed off our fear. As the creature moved closer, I felt a surge of adrenaline.
I fought against the paralysis, willing my body to respond. "Get away from me!" I screamed silently, my mind racing with terror. The woman's expression shifted from fear to desperation, and I realized she was trying to warn me. Suddenly,
The creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched. I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body, and with a final burst of willpower, I broke free from the paralysis. I shot up in bed, gasping for breath, the room illuminated by flashes of lightning. Was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm raged outside, but I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I had faced my fears, and somehow I had survived. But the memory of the woman and the creature lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked within. In the days that followed, I researched sleep paralysis, discovering that many people experience similar encounters. I learned about the phenomenon of night terrors and the psychological effects of fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my experience was more than just a nightmare. It was a warning. That night, I decided to confront my fears. I set up a camera in my bedroom, hoping to capture any strange occurrences while I slept. As I lay down, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I would not let the darkness control me. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. But just as I began to dream, I was jolted awake once more, the familiar sensation of paralysis gripping me. The room was dark, and I could feel the presence again, lurking in the shadows. This time, I was ready. I focused on the woman, willing her to show me what she needed. "What do you want?" I thought, my mind racing. The creature loomed closer, but I refused to let fear take hold. Suddenly the woman appeared beside me, her expression filled with urgency. "You must help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the stillness. "I am trapped in this nightmare, and you are my only hope." With newfound determination, I reached out to her, willing my body to respond. "I will help you," I thought, my heart racing. "Together we can break free." As I focused on the creature, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. I envisioned a light surrounding us, pushing back the darkness. The creature recoiled, its form flickering as if it were losing its grip on reality. In that moment, I felt a connection with the woman, a bond forged through our shared suffering. "We can do this," I thought, my voice steady. "We will escape together." With a final burst of energy, I pushed against the darkness, and the creature let out a deafening roar. The room filled with light, and I felt the weight of fear lift from my shoulders. The woman smiled, her expression transforming from anguish to gratitude. As the light enveloped us, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that we had broken free from the nightmare, and in that moment, I understood the power of confronting our fears. When I awoke the next morning, the sun streamed through my window, illuminating the room in a warm glow. I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. The darkness that had once haunted me was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. From that day on, I embraced my dreams, knowing that I had the power to confront the shadows that lurked within. The woman's Spirit had been set free, and I had learned that even in the darkest of nights there is always a glimmer of hope. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid and terrifying, often leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths
Of my fears. It started on a night like any other. I had fallen asleep after a long day, my mind heavy with exhaustion.
As I drifted into slumber, I felt a familiar sensazione weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in my own
Mind. In the darkness, I could see a figure looming at the foot of my bed.
It was a shadowy silhouette, its features indistinguishable, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound escaped my lips. I was completely paralyzed, caught in a nightmare that felt all too
Real. The figure began to move closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel the cold air surrounding it, and a sense of dread washed over me. "Help me," I tried to whisper, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I was left with the overwhelming sensation of fear, as if the very essence of my being was being drained away. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the figure reached out, its hand hovering just above my face. I felt a rush of cold air, and in that moment, I was jolted awake, gasping for breath. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to me. The following nights were a blur of sleeplessness and anxiety.
Each time I closed my eyes, I was met with the same oppressive weight and the shadowy figure that haunted my dreams. I began to dread sleep, fearing the inevitable encounter that awaited me. I tried everything, sleeping with the lights on, avoiding caffeine, and even seeking advice from friends, but nothing seemed to help. One evening, desperate for relief, I decided to research sleep paralysis. As I delved into the topic, I discovered that many people experience similar phenomena, often attributing it to supernatural encounters. The stories were chilling, people describing shadowy figures, feelings of being watched, and an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone in my suffering. Determined to confront my fears, I decided to keep a dream journal. Each morning, I would write down the details of my nightmares, hoping that by acknowledging them, I could regain control. But as I documented my experiences, I noticed a pattern emerging. The figure in my dreams was becoming more defined, its presence more menacing. One night, after a particularly vivid nightmare, I awoke to find myself once again paralyzed. The weight pressed down on my chest, and I could feel the familiar chill in the air. The figure stood at the foot of my bed, its features now clearer than ever. It was a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light around it. "Why are you here?" I tried to scream, but the words were trapped in my throat. The figure moved closer, its hand reaching out toward me. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I fought against the paralysis, willing my body to respond. In that moment, I remembered the advice I had read: focus on moving a single finger, anything to break the paralysis. With every ounce of strength, I concentrated
On my right index finger. Slowly, it began to twitch, and I felt a rush of hope. As I regained control, I pushed myself up, breaking free from the grip of the nightmare.
The figure recoiled, its expression shifting from menace to surprise. I could feel the weight lifting, and with a final surge of energy I lunged for the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. The figure vanished, leaving behind only the remnants of fear that clung to the air. I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling as I processed what had just happened. I had faced my nightmare and emerged victorious, but I knew that the battle was far from over. In the days that followed, I continued to confront my fears. I practiced mindfulness and meditation, learning to ground myself in the present moment. I shared my experiences with others, finding solace in the knowledge that I was not alone. Slowly, the nightmares began to fade, and the figure that had once haunted me became a distant memory. But even now, as I lay in bed each night, I remain vigilant. I know that the darkness can creep back in, and the shadows may return. Yet, I have learned that I hold the power to confront my fears, to reclaim my dreams, and to find peace within the chaos. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of fear that the night could bring. It started on a seemingly ordinary night. I had just moved into a new apartment, excited to start fresh in a new city. The first few nights were uneventful, but on the third night, I awoke in the middle of the night, unable to move. My body felt heavy, as if it were pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Panic surged through me as I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The darkness in the room felt oppressive, and I could sense a presence lurking just beyond my vision. I strained to turn my head, and when I finally managed to do so, I was met with a sight that sent chills down my spine. In the corner of my room stood a figure, shadowy silhouette with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It was watching me, its gaze filled with an unsettling hunger. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, and I struggled against the invisible weight holding me down. "Help!" I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The figure began to move. Closer, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. I could feel its presence enveloping me, and I knew I had to escape. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the paralysis lifted, and I bolted upright in bed, gasping for air. My heart raced as I flicked on the lamp, flooding the room with light. The figure was gone, but the fear lingered, wrapping around me like a shroud. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I researched sleep paralysis and learned that it was a phenomenon experienced by many, often accompanied by hallucinations. But knowing that didn't ease my fear. If anything, it made it worse. That night, I decided to take precautions. I set up a camera to record while I slept, hoping to capture any strange occurrences. As I lay in bed, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I would face whatever haunted me. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, there was nothing unusual, just me sleeping peacefully. But as the night wore on, I noticed something strange. Around 3 a.m., the shadows in the room seemed to shift, and I could see the outline of a figure standing at the foot of my bed. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the figure lean closer, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I could see my own body lying still, completely unaware of the presence looming over me. The fear I had felt the night before washed over me again, and I quickly turned off the video. That night, I decided to confront my fears. I lay in bed, determined to stay awake and face whatever came my way. As the clock struck 3 a.m., I felt the familiar heaviness settle over me. My heart raced as I fought against the paralysis, but it was no use. I was trapped once more. The figure appeared again, its eyes glowing brighter than before. This time, I was ready. I focused all my energy on breaking free, willing myself to move. "You don't scare me!" I shouted in my mind, and to my surprise, the figure hesitated. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to lift my arm and reach for the lamp. The moment the light flooded the room, the figure dissipated into the shadows, leaving me alone once more. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. But the nightmares continued, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. I began to wonder if the figure was a manifestation of my own fears, a reflection of the darkness that lurked within me. One night, I found myself in the depths of a nightmare, trapped in a labyrinth of shadows. The figure was there, taunting
me, whispering my deepest insecurities. "You'll never escape," it hissed, its voice echoing in the darkness. But this time, I refused to back down.
I confronted the figure, demanding to know what it wanted. "Why do you haunt me?" I shouted, my voice steady. The figure paused, its glowing eyes softening for a moment. "I am a part of you," it replied, its voice now a whisper. "You cannot escape your own darkness." In that moment I understood the figure was not just a
monster. It was a representation of my fears, my anxieties, and my insecurities. I had been running from it for too long, and it was time to face the truth. With newfound determination, I reached out to the figure, embracing the darkness instead of fighting it. "I accept you," I said, my voice steady. "You are a part of me, but you do not control me." As I spoke those words, the figure began to dissolve, the shadows fading away. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. When I awoke the next morning, the sun streamed through my window and I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The nightmares had not disappeared entirely, but I no longer feared them. I had learned to embrace the darkness within me, and in doing so, I had found my strength. From that day on, I approached each night with a sense of calm. I knew that the shadows would always be a part of me, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the night had in store. Feel free to modify any part of the story, or let me know if you need further assistance. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid, terrifying experiences that left me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths of my fears. It was a chilly autumn night when it happened. I had just returned home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted. As I crawled into bed, I hoped for a peaceful night's sleep, but the moment I closed my eyes, I felt the familiar grip of dread creeping in. I drifted into a restless slumber, and soon I found myself in the midst of a nightmare. I was standing in a dark, foggy forest, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Panic surged through me as I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were stuck in quicksand. Suddenly I woke up, or at least I thought I did.
I lay in bed, unable to move, my body frozen in place. The room was dimly lit and I could see the shadows dancing on the walls. My heart raced as I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis, a phenomenon I had heard about but never encountered. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my lips. The weight of an unseen force pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I could feel the panic rising within me, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I noticed a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a dark silhouette, featureless and ominous. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a figment of my imagination, or was it real? The figure seemed to loom closer, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Help me," I thought I heard it whisper, though the words were barely audible. I wanted to respond, to fight against the terror that gripped me, but I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner of my fears. As the figure drew nearer, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I focused all my energy on moving my fingers, willing them to twitch, to break free from the paralysis. Slowly, I felt a flicker of movement, and with a final push, I managed to sit up, gasping for breath. The figure vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I glanced around the room, my heart racing as I tried to process what had just happened. Was it a nightmare? Or had I truly encountered something supernatural? Shaken, I decided to get out of bed and splash some cold water on my face. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, half expecting to see the figure lurking behind me, but there was nothing there. The following nights were filled with dread. I tried to avoid sleep, fearing that the nightmares would return. But exhaustion eventually took its toll, and I found myself drifting off again, only to be met with the same terrifying experience. Each time, the figure grew bolder, inching closer to me, whispering words I couldn't quite understand. I felt trapped in a cycle of fear, unable to escape the grasp of my own mind. I began to research sleep paralysis, hoping to find answers, but the more I learned, the more helpless I felt. One night, I decided to confront my fears. I lay in bed, determined to face the figure head-on. As I drifted into sleep, I felt the familiar weight pressing down on me, and soon I was back in the dark forest. This time I stood my ground. The figure appeared, its shadowy form looming before me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the silence. To my surprise, the figure paused, as if taken aback by my defiance. "I want to be free," it whispered, its voice a haunting melody. "Help me." In that moment, I realized that the figure was not just a manifestation of my fears. It was a reflection of my own struggles. I felt a surge of empathy for the entity before me. "I will help you," I said, my voice steady. "But you must help me in return." As I spoke those words, the atmosphere shifted. The darkness began to recede, and I felt a warmth enveloping me. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time I could see its features, a face filled with sorrow and longing. Together we faced the darkness, and as I reached out to the figure, I felt a connection forming between us. The weight of fear lifted, and I knew that I had broken the cycle. The figure smiled, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. When I awoke the next morning, I felt different. The nightmares had ceased, and the shadows that had once haunted me were gone. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger, no longer a prisoner of my own mind. From that day on, I learned to embrace the darkness, understanding that it was a part of me. The experience had taught me that sometimes the things we fear the most can lead to profound healing and growth. I had confronted the night terrors, and in doing so, I had found my own light. I had always been a restless sleeper, but it wasn't until I moved into my new apartment that I began to experience something far more sinister: nightmares that felt all too real, and a paralyzing fear that gripped me in the dark. It started innocently.
Enough, with vivid dreams that left me waking in a cold sweat, but soon escalated into something I couldn't explain. The first night in my new home, I fell asleep easily, lulled by the comforting hum of the city outside.
But as the clock struck 3, I was jolted awake by a feeling of dread that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I glanced around the dimly lit room, my heart racing, but everything seemed normal. I tried to shake off the feeling and drifted back to sleep. That's when it happened. I found myself in a dream that felt more like a nightmare. I was standing in a dark hallway, the air thick with an oppressive silence. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I felt an overwhelming
sense of fear. I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't move.
It was as if I was rooted to the spot, unable to escape the darkness that loomed ahead. Suddenly I heard a whisper, a soft, chilling voice that seemed to echo through the hallway. "You can't escape." Panic surged through me as I struggled
to move, but it was futile. I was trapped in my own mind, unable to wake up. Just as the whisper grew louder, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there it was, a shadowy figure, its features obscured by darkness. It reached out toward me, and I felt a cold grip around my throat, squeezing tighter and tighter. I gasped for breath, but no sound escaped my lips. In that moment of sheer terror, I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest.
I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to me. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see the figure lurking in the shadows, but I was alone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The next few nights were a blur of restless sleep and terrifying dreams. Each time I fell asleep, I found myself back in that dark hallway, unable to escape the shadowy figure that haunted me. I began to dread the night, knowing that sleep would only bring more nightmares. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, searching for explanations. I discovered that what I was experiencing was known as sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where the mind awakens while the body remains in a state of sleep. It often comes with vivid hallucinations, and many people report feeling a presence in the room with them. Armed with this knowledge, I tried to prepare myself for the next time it happened. I practiced relaxation techniques and focused on staying calm, hoping to break the cycle of fear. But when the night came, I was still unprepared. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a familiar weight settle over me. I was back in the dark hallway, the air thick with dread. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if it were made of stone. The whisper returned, echoing in my ears. "You can't escape." This time, I fought against the paralysis with
all my strength. I focused on my breathing, willing myself to wake up.
But the shadowy figure was closer now, its cold fingers brushing against my skin. I felt the grip around my throat tighten, and I gasped for air, panic surging through me. In that moment, I remembered the advice I had read. Focus on moving.
A single finger. With every ounce of willpower, I concentrated on my right index finger. Slowly, I felt it twitch. Encouraged, I pushed harder, willing my body to respond. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from the paralysis.
I shot up in bed, gasping for breath, the nightmare fading into the shadows. I was awake, but the fear lingered, a reminder of the darkness that had threatened to consume me. Determined to reclaim my nights, I sought help from a therapist who specialized in sleep disorders. Through our sessions, I learned techniques to manage my anxiety and confront my fears. I began to keep a dream journal, documenting my nightmares and exploring their meanings. As the weeks passed, I noticed a shift. The nightmares became less frequent, and when they did occur, I felt more in control. I learned to face the shadowy figure, to confront the fear that had once paralyzed me. I realized that it was a manifestation of my own anxieties, a reflection of the struggles I faced in my waking life. One night, as I drifted off to sleep, I found myself back in the dark hallway once more. The whisper echoed in my ears, but this time I stood my ground. "You don't control me," I declared, my voice steady. The shadowy figure loomed closer, but I refused to back down. "I am not afraid of you," I said, my voice stronger than before. The figure hesitated, and in that moment I felt a surge of power. I reached out, and to my surprise, the darkness began to dissipate, replaced by a warm light that filled the hallway. As the light enveloped me, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The shadowy figure faded away, and I awoke in my bed, a smile on my face. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. From that night on, the nightmares ceased, and I learned to embrace the darkness within me. I understood that while fear may linger, it does not have to control my life. I had conquered the night terror, and in doing so, I had found the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For as long as I could remember, I had been plagued by nightmares. They were vivid and terrifying, often leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. But it wasn't until I experienced sleep paralysis that I truly understood the depths
Of fear. It started on a night like any other. I had just settled into bed, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting comforting shadows across the room.
As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. But that tranquility was short-lived. I found myself in a dream, standing in a dark, foggy landscape. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and I felt an overwhelming sense
Of dread creeping in. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were weighed down by an unseen force. Panic surged through me as I struggled to move, but it was futile. Suddenly I heard a low growl behind me, and I froze.
The sound sent chills down my spine, and I felt a presence drawing closer. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and there it was, a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. Just as the figure lunged at me, I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my room, but something felt off. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, trapped in a state between sleep and wakefulness.
I could see the room around me, but I was powerless to escape. The air felt heavy, and I could sense a presence looming over me. I strained to turn my head, and that's when I saw it, the shadowy figure from my dream, standing at the foot of my
bed. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was no longer just a nightmare.
It was real! Help me! I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The figure moved closer, its eyes piercing into my soul. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, and I fought against the paralysis with every ounce of strength I had. In
that moment, I remembered something I had read about sleep paralysis, that it was often accompanied by hallucinations, manifestations of our deepest fears. But knowing that didn't ease my panic. I was trapped, and the figure was closing in. As it reached out toward me, I summoned all my willpower and focused on moving my fingers. Slowly, I felt a flicker of movement, and I pushed against the paralysis. With a final surge of adrenaline, I managed to let out a desperate scream. The figure recoiled, and in an instant, it vanished into thin air. I bolted upright in bed, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The room was silent, and the oppressive weight that had settled over me lifted. I was free, but the relief was short-lived. Over the next few weeks, the nightmares continued, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. The shadowy figure became a constant presence in my dreams, always lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment I would succumb to fear once more. Determined to reclaim my nights, I began researching sleep paralysis and its connection to nightmares. I learned about the importance of sleep hygiene, relaxation techniques, and even the power of lucid dreaming. I started keeping a dream journal, documenting my experiences in hopes of understanding the patterns that plagued me. One night, after weeks of preparation, I decided to confront the figure head-on. I went to bed with a sense of purpose, repeating to myself that I was in control of my dreams. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. When the familiar darkness enveloped me, I found myself back in that foggy landscape. This time, however, I was ready. I felt the weight of the figure approaching, but instead of running, I stood my ground. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady. The figure paused, its glowing eyes fixed on me. "What do you want?" To my surprise, it spoke, its voice a low rumble. "I am the fear you refuse to face. You cannot escape me." In that moment, I realized that the figure was a manifestation of my own anxieties and insecurities. I had been running from it for too long, and it was time to confront the darkness within me. "I will not let you control me any longer," I declared, my voice growing stronger. "I choose to face my fears." As I spoke those words, the fog began to dissipate, and the landscape transformed. The shadows that had once loomed over me faded away, replaced by a warm light that enveloped me. The figure shrank before my eyes, its form dissolving into the air. I woke up the next morning, feeling different, lighter, freer. The nightmares that had haunted me for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. From that day on, I learned to embrace the darkness within me, understanding that it was a part of who I was. The shadowy figure no longer held power over me, and I found solace in the knowledge that I could confront my fears head-on. Though nightmares may still visit me from time to time, I now face them with courage, knowing that I am the master
of my own mind. The night may be dark, but I have learned to find the light within.